Welcome into episode 117 of The Checklist, brought to you by Secure Mac. I'm Ken Ray.
And I'm August Trometer.
More scammy apps turn up in the App Store. Look for the lock, then look again. And a few high-profile data breaches. Time to tackle it all on this edition of The Checklist, brought to you by Secure Mac. Word of 3 apps in the App Store pulling almost the exact same scam. Oh, I'm sorry, I should have mentioned they're scammy apps. Ars Technica has the story of the Fitness Balance app and Calories Tracker app, while 9to5Mac tells the tale of the app Heart Rate Measurement. It's pretty much the same story for all 3. For the first 2, Ars Technica says, with no advanced warning, according to a couple of Reddit posts, the apps charged users fees of $99.99, $119, or €139, depending on the country of the user. Users who had a credit or debit card connected to their Apple account were immediately billed. The way 9to5Mac describes the scam it saw, in the case of the heart rate measurement app, the scam relies on a user not reading the dialog box that appears when a heart rate reading is attempted. It's kind of unfair, though, to say they didn't read it. The screen brightness drops to its lowest point, and the black and white in-app purchase user interface is almost illegible compared to the bright red fingerprint icon that appears on screen with the Touch ID devices. That one sneaks a charge on people of $89.99. Now, it's hard to see how anyone thought that they would get away with this. Apple sends receipts for... Well, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. Apple does send receipts for in-app purchases soon after an in-app purchase is made, doesn't it?
Absolutely. In some cases, it's delayed because of the way they do their charges, but you should get one very quickly.
See, I'm trying to get my head around the numbers. I've never heard of any of these apps, but I may not be their target demographic. What I'm wondering is, are they relying on old people who might not notice the weirdness around the charge? Are they figuring Apple's not going to come after them for the money? I mean, I can't quite figure out what the scam is here or how the scam is supposed to work.
You know, I think it comes down to Barnum. You can fool some of the people all the time. It's very much like spam email. If it didn't work, they would stop sending them. Mm-hmm. And in this case, you know, the apps, they throw them up there and they know that there's a lifespan on it before they get caught. But they're going to try and make as much money as they can. And I think this goes back to, what the first app that sort of did this was the $999 app that basically just had a red dot on the screen. If I remember correctly, it was a crazy app that Apple ended up taking off the App Store, but people paid $1,000 for this app that did nothing. And it kind of goes back to that. And these apps are just taking advantage of people who either don't read, the dialog boxes that pop up or, you know, don't really pay attention to their credit card accounts.
Now, you may ask how the apps even got approved. I mean, because it's been a few years since that red dot app that August was talking about. It's possible that they were that they seem legit, but then their behaviors changed. According to 9to5Mac, Apple requires approval for in-app purchases during app review, but not for changing the amount from, say, 99 cents to $89.99. I'm wondering, should such changes go through an approval process as well? Or, you know, maybe Apple should set some parameters like, well, I don't know. I mean, they could set it in stages, but the problem is you just keep upping it by $5 a day every day until you're up to that $90. I mean, is there an obvious solution that you see that maybe Apple could do to keep this from happening to people?
Sure. You know, Apple changes their rules all the time. You know, in the early days of the App Store, you could change your description as often as you wanted, and there was no review involved. And now they review the description before it gets reposted. So they could do exactly the same thing with the in-app purchases. I think that would be a great first step. I would imagine that based on this, especially because there were 3 apps kind of all at the same time, that they are reviewing internally some of the things that they could do to make sure this doesn't happen again. You know, the thing that Apple is always conscious of is the fact that when somebody has a problem with an app, it doesn't matter who built the app. It doesn't matter who sold the app. It doesn't matter where the charge went or where the money went. Apple is the one that takes the blame. And so Apple really knows that. They take it to heart. And when stuff like this happens, they try and make sure it doesn't happen again because they don't want to have, they don't want to look bad.
Now, all 3 of these apps have been removed from the App Store. Additionally, Ars Technica says, at least for the 2 that it was covering, people who had been charged reported that their requests for refunds were being processed and were expected to be completed in the next 30 days. I'm trying to figure out what kind of advice you could give people here heading into the App Store. I mean, I'm over the idea now that the App Store is a completely safe place, safer certainly than, the Google Play Store, but not the Garden of Eden that the walled garden was supposed to offer. Are there any particular tips for, safe shopping in the App Store that you would offer?
Sure. And I'd like to point out there's a difference between a walled garden and a Garden of Eden. Apple's doing a pretty good job of keeping the scum and villainy out, but you can't catch every criminal. Otherwise, if you could, we'd all live in a better place. Let's just put it that way. But, I will say that they will make changes. I'm quite certain of that. And in the meantime, all of this comes down to you being vigilant. It's your money. And you are the one responsible for it. You should pay attention to the dialog boxes that you click yes to. If you have questions about what you're seeing and you don't like the answers that you're getting or you're not getting any answers, just don't purchase it. I think it really comes down to the individual. We have to be vigilant. We can't rely on somebody else to make sure our doors are locked at home. We are the ones that have to do that ourselves.
Oh, I got to defend the people who fell for this, though, on at least one of the apps. I mean, that description that they were talking about earlier was a heart rate monitor app. And so what it's encouraging you to do is keep your finger on the button. And then the developers basically made it almost impossible to read the thing that said, hey, by the way, if you keep your finger on this button, we're going to charge you. This was something that people were using Touch ID to take advantage of other people. There is one thing that you can do. You can turn off Touch ID if we're paying for purchases through iTunes and the App Store. That doesn't seem like a bad idea. But, I don't know that stories of 3 scammy apps, that have already been removed from the App Store make that worth doing.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend that only because I like the convenience of Touch ID. Yeah. And honestly, as we move to Face ID, that's going to be less and less of an issue. Yeah. That said, if you want to do it, you can go to your settings. You tap on Touch ID and passcode and then iTunes and App Store. And there's a setting there where you can turn it off. But really, as I said, ask a lot of questions. And I think I mentioned this, a few shows ago. If you see a charge that you don't agree with on your credit card that came from one of the apps, talk to Apple. They don't advertise it, but they've got an amazing kind of return policy, and they will refund you for any of those charges with very few questions asked. And I encourage you to do that if you see something that just isn't right.
One Reddit user tied to one of these apps said, luckily, I didn't have a linked card or paying account, which I honestly didn't know was a possibility at this point. Kind of like turning off Touch ID. That feels a bit extreme, but is that something that you'd suggest?
If you don't want to buy anything.
Right.
But you can do it. When you set up an account with Apple, you can, they ask you your payment method and you can set it up with a credit card, PayPal, or they give you an option of none. If you really feel, like that's something you need to do, you can go ahead and change that in your settings, I believe, or you can create another account just with none as your payment method.
One other thing, don't just rely on App Store reviews. Ars Technica says that the 2 apps that it covered carried rave reviews, but they figure, those were probably written by people connected to the scam. So just don't just go by what's in the App Store, because, the App Store is where we're running into this trouble.
Yeah, the whole sort of pay for review stuff on the App Store, even though Apple's tried to crack down on it, I think is still a real problem. And, in this case, it sounds like the companies involved kind of stacked the deck in their favor to make it sound like it was a great app when really it was obviously taking advantage of you.
The lock in the URL bar of your browser means the site is safe, right? Kinda. But it doesn't mean that you're not giving your information to a bad guy. The story depresses me. A report from CNET says, you may have heard you should look for the padlock symbol at the top of a website before entering your password or credit card information into an online form. It's well-meaning advice, but new data shows it isn't enough to keep your sensitive information secure. Let's go over why, shall we?
Basically, the padlock doesn't necessarily mean what you think it means. If you think about the padlock as a cone of silence where you are talking to somebody else and no one else can hear what's going on, that's sort of what the padlock means. The only difference is that if you got the cone of silence on, there's no guarantee that the person you're not talking to is a spy, or some sort of bad actor or just a jerk. So while you're having secure encrypted communications with whoever it is, they could be a fake website.
Right. So, just making up a company, if I intend to go to galaxytrade.com, but I go to galaxytrade.co instead, the people behind that typo may be trying to get my information. By encrypting the site, getting the padlock in the URL bar, I'm less likely to notice the typo and go ahead and enter my info. I guess what I'm wondering is this mostly a typo squatting issue? Like, where I mean to type in Apple and instead I type in Apple, or something like that? Or is it like a big thing, for people visiting sites of nefarious companies that are up to no good?
I think it's probably a little bit of both, but I'd lean more towards the typo squatting. The fact is that, in order to use the web, you have to know sort of the English language. And I know there's in other countries, you don't have to in the URL, but really a lot of domains are basically in English. And if you can't type it, then you run into problems. So I definitely think that it's more of a typo squatting issue. Really be careful when typing in the URL. Make sure you get it right. Don't just click a link. A lot of times, especially if it comes in an email, oh my goodness, if it comes in an email and, you've got the .co instead of the .com, then obviously you're not going to catch that. And then you've loaded up a website that is that jerk that I was talking about.
You've also, there's also the other thing of I think it's Cyrillic, right? Where some of the letters will look like letters in the English language, but they're actually Cyrillic characters, so the A or whichever one, it's the A or the P or something. In that apple.com link in that email that you got isn't actually the letter A. It's some other letter in some other language that's directing you to a completely different website that's, positioned to kind of look like Apple and perfectly willing to go ahead and take your information for you or from you.
Absolutely. All of that stuff comes into play. And you just got to remember that you're one person out of billions of people on the planet. And a lot of those billions are trying to get your dollars is what it comes down to. I recommend password managers and security software, especially the security software. Password managers will let you know that the URL doesn't match the site you're trying to visit. So, for example, if somebody has the Cyrillic Amazon.com and that's what you go to instead of the real Amazon.com, there will be a warning that will come up. I think it's also worth noting there are sort of levels of that padlock. It's more expensive, but the certificates that companies buy to have the padlock, there's extended validation or what they call green bar certificates. This requires additional validation, including a lot more paperwork, phone calls, and there's a lot more certainty that the company that you're dealing with is the right company. The green bar, I think, started with Chrome, and it was a nice feature so that when you went to one of these websites with extended validation, Chrome showed the name in green. Chrome doesn't do that anymore, which is strange to me. Safari does now. Chrome actually will show you additional information. So that's a good way to help try and make sure that you're visiting the site that you want to visit. But still, there are still people out there who are going to try and fake that stuff too. So just be vigilant.
In a moment, once more into the breach is... But first, a word about MacScan 3 from Secure Mac. No, it's like a breach, but there are many of them, August. I don't know what you're thinking. Anyway, more of that in a moment, but first, a word about MacScan 3 from Secure Mac. This is not fear-mongering. I'm not going to tell you that every time anything happens online, it's bad news, but you do know that there are bad guys out there trying to target you for your information. Staying ahead of them is very important, but it's also relatively easy if you're running good security software. Security software like MacScan 3. Secure Mac has been doing what it does for over a decade. What MacScan 3 does is detect and remove Mac malware, catch keyloggers, remove tracking cookies, and provide full range or targeted scanning, all without crowding up your hard drive or slowing down your computer. Give worry the boot with MacScan 3 from Secure Mac. Sign up for a free 30-day trial today at securemac.com/MacScan. That's MacScan 3 by Secure Mac. Your 30-day free trial is waiting at securemac.com/MacScan. We'll wrap today's show with news of not one, not two, but three big data breaches. Late last week, according to a post from Malwarebytes, Marriott disclosed a large-scale data breach impacting up to 500 million customers who have stayed at a Starwood-branded hotel within the last 4 years. Now, you may think you've never stayed at a Starwood hotel, except Starwood hotels aren't called that. Affected properties include Westin, Sheraton, the Luxury Collection, 4 Points by Sheraton, W Hotels, St. Regis, Le Méridien, Aloft or Aloft, Tribute Portfolio, and Design Hotels. Marriott says there was unauthorized access to a database related to customer reservations from 2014 to the 10th of September 2018 for approximately 327 million people. The piece says the breached data includes some combination of a name, mailing address, phone number, email address, passport number, Starwood preferred guest account information, date of birth, gender, arrival and departure information, reservation date, and communication preferences. For some of those guests, their credit card numbers and expiration dates were exposed. However, they were encrypted. So, Mr. Trometer, if people think that they may have been affected, and we're only talking about 500 million people, what should those people do?
Stay at a Hilton?
Nice. Well, are you sure?
No, I'm not sure anymore. I'm really not sure.
Stay at a friend's house, like a really trusted friend. Stay at a really trusted friend's house, which, is kind of a pain, but probably they're not going to scam you for all your information.
This is one of those things where on the surface you go, okay, well, the credit card stuff was encrypted, so, that's safe. So really all they got was my name and my home address and my phone number and my email and my passport. Right. And, my date of birth and like pretty much everything that they would need to go into like the office down the street from me and get a birth certificate in my name. And then on top of that, with Starwood, they've been really pushing their Starwood app on iOS and Android, which you log into with your Starwood account number. And given, all of the other data breaches that we've had, they could hack, they could possibly know your password for the Starwood app if you use it across multiple websites, which now means they could just walk up to your room door because they know the reservation and where you're staying, and they could walk up to your room door and with the app tap a button and unlock your door and walk in while you're there or not there. This gets really, really spooky.
Well, hang on one second, though, because, you're kind of going from the scary stuff that's already out there to a little bit of James Bond, right? Supposedly...
But it's not.
Well, it kind of is, though, because, they're talking about a set period of time that lasted for 4 years, and that's huge. It seems to me the real concern right now is, okay, so this information is out there. What do I do about that information? Because what you're asking me to do now is never trust that I'm safe sleeping in a hotel, which I have a hard enough time with already.
I don't want to go that crazy, but what I am saying is that if they've got your Starwood account number and they've been able to take your email address or phone number, connect that to a different database that has been, breached, then they could possibly know your password. And if they've got your Starwood account number and your Starwood password, they could log in, know where you're staying. And because they know where you're staying, they now have access to your room.
That still seems like it has to be fairly targeted, but let's move on to the part where, okay, so this has happened. I stayed at one of these hotels for the past 4 years. What do I do now?
Yeah, change your Starwood password immediately. That's really the first thing that you do. And while they say that the credit card information was encrypted, I would still keep an eye on all of your banking and credit card accounts just in case, and then keep an eye on it going forward. If you think your financial information has been compromised, you can do a credit freeze. And then finally, don't click on any email saying your information was breached. Click here to fix it. If you get an email from Starwood, I would just type in starwood.com instead of clicking on a link, because right now that's huge bait to get you to type in a lot more information than they have.
Yeah, we talked about this a few weeks ago. Again, you're talking about 500 million people here. So even if you haven't stayed at one of these hotels, or if you don't remember because you didn't realize that all of these hotels were Starwood hotels under the Marriott label, or, Marriott hotels under the Starwood label, or however that whole thing works at this point, there's a possibility that over the next few days or few weeks, some enterprising young scam artist is going to send out a bunch of emails saying, hey, you stayed at a Marriott, your information has been breached, click here to change your password. And if you click there to change your password, maybe you weren't even one of the people who are affected, but you are now. So
yeah, I feel like that's sort of like, when you're in high school and you play, dogpile on Bob, because Bob is the guy that you just, no one likes. And so, Starwood kind of piled on Bob with all of this data breach stuff. And then somebody else goes, well, yeah, us too. And they're jumping on top too, just because they think they can get more information out of Bob. So just be very, very careful.
Marriott's the big one, but wait, there's more.
There's always more.
Yeah, there's always more. That's true. One of the Nikolai, I think it was Nicholas Tajek, I can't remember, said, you could start a whole other podcast and have a weekly show that's just about data breaches at this point. He's not wrong, except that would just be a depressing podcast, and I don't want to do it. Quora is an online community that focuses on asking and answering questions. It was founded in 2009 by 2 former Facebook employees, and another piece from Malwarebytes says data stolen from it may concern up to 100 million users. Information loss may include username, associated email address, and the encrypted password. In some cases, the piece says, imported data from other social networks and private messages on the platform may have been taken as well. For this one, people should what?
Again, immediately change your password. And I will fess up. I was one of the affected ones here.
Really?
Because I do have a Quora account. And I will give Quora this. They seemed to understand the importance of this. They sent out emails to everybody telling them what to do. None of the links in their email were anything close to suspicious. And so I've got to give them at least some props for trying to do the right thing in a really difficult situation. But, number one, immediately change your password. If you're using the same login credentials on another site, change your password there as well. And stop doing that. Stop using the same password across websites. I know it's hard, but if you use a password manager to help, it makes it so much easier. Even the Mac OS with Safari, it doesn't translate to Chrome, but with Safari and Apple's password stuff, it works pretty well. And all of your passwords are unique across multiple websites, so you don't have to worry about that kind of thing anymore. And then if you've connected other accounts to your Quora account, you can disconnect those under Quora under your settings. And I would recommend at least reviewing that, if not disconnecting all of them and then reconnecting once you have a new password.
Yeah, I was going to ask, is that something you feel like is necessary to do?
Probably not, but in a case like this, you never know. And especially if those accounts that you're connected to are using the same password, I would make sure to change all of those passwords.
Now, why shouldn't we reuse passwords? Just ask the good people at Dunkin' Donuts. They haven't been the victim of an attack exactly, but, kind of ends up being the same. Malwarebytes says a threat actor successfully managed to gain access to Dunkin' Donuts Perks accounts. The Perks accounts is a run-of-the-mill loyalty reward program. Dunkin' Donuts claims that there was no breach into their systems, but that reused passwords were to blame. Gosh, August, what should people do? Or, more specifically, what should people not do?
So, I'm gonna throw this out there. I know this is just a radical analogy, but you wouldn't reuse a donut, so why reuse a password?
You can't reuse a donut; it would be gross. I applaud you're trying to use the analogy, but dude, there's really only so much you can do with a donut. But yeah, this is something that we've been talking about forever and ever and ever on this show. Don't reuse passwords. And listen, I miss the days when you could, or the days when you didn't realize that you couldn't. But you can't. You just can't anymore.
You can't. And what they did here is what they call credential stuffing. And it's basically where they get a database of known email addresses and passwords, and then they just throw as many domains as possible into a list. And then they use a program that just goes through that list and pings the server. So in this case, they pinged the Dunkin' Donuts server and tried to log in using every one of these email address password combinations. And so not all of them worked, but the ones who had reused passwords across websites did. And that's how they got access to the Dunkin' Donuts accounts.
So obviously the first thing people need to do is change their password on the Dunkin' Donuts Perks program. What else should people do after that?
Like we said, make it a strong password, not used on other sites. And then I would petition Dunkin' Donuts to use two-factor authentication. I mean, if this is something that really, truly bothers you, get them to use two-factor authentication, because that's the kind of thing that when a request comes in to log in from an unknown computer, Dunkin' Donuts should be verifying that that's an actual user that they want on their system. And unless they have two-factor, it's not going to work that way.
I gotta say, I mean, like a loyalty program for a donut shop. I'm so reticent to give my information to anything like that. I mean, it's like, I don't know, or whatever. On this one, by the way, the Dunkin' Donuts actually did something pretty cool, I think. They did forced password resets for all the customers the company believes were affected, which is great. I mean, they're basically making you, as long as hopefully they have it set so that you can't just put the same password in again. I assume they do if they were smart enough to actually force people to reset their passwords. If the bad guys did access your account, by the way, they may have gotten your first and last name, email address, 16-digit DD Perks account numbers, and your DD Perks QR codes. And then bad guys went after that. I mean, that's the other thing that confuses me. I know there are reasons. I get it. I understand. It's crazy, though. Like, you're going to be bragging. It's like, oh, I knocked over a bank. And then you're going to be like, yeah, I got the Dunkin' Donuts Perks numbers for a bunch of people. But, it's one step closer to identity theft. I mean, honestly, it's crazy to think that your love of donuts could end up costing you something, aside from years of your life. But, it's potentially a serious thing, even though it's hard not to laugh.
Yeah, it's just one more reason to be gluten-free.
Okay, now you're just talking like a crazy person. Hey, if you're looking for more security news and how-tos, the place to look, or a place to look, is securemac.com/checklist. There you will find notes for this show and for all the shows that we've done. I know there are a bunch of topics that we hit in today's show, actually, that we've talked about before, so please use it as a resource. The site is there because we want people to be able to go back and draw on the topics that we've done before. securemac.com/checklist. If you have a question you'd like to ask or a topic you would like to hear us hit, our email address is checklist@securemac.com. The address again is checklist@securemac.com. And if you can't remember that, please do remember this. You're listening to The Checklist, brought to you by Secure Mac. And we'll talk to you next week.